The room is quiet, too quiet. Your hand hovers over the phone, thumb twitching toward the icon. You don't need to check it. There's no notification, no reason. But the pull is there, a low voltage hum in your chest. You tell yourself it's just a habit, a weak moment, a lack of willpower. That's what they want you to believe. Here's what the data actually shows. Your dopamine system didn't break. It was never designed for this environment. The same circuit that once drove your ancestors to find water, locate ripe fruit, and detect predators' movement in the grass is now being hijacked by a glowing rectangle in your palm. And the numbers are brutal. A 2019 study from the University of Chicago found that the mere presence of a smartphone, even when turned off, reduced available cognitive capacity by roughly 10%. Participants who placed their phones in another room outperformed those who kept them on the desk by a measurable margin across continuous performance tests. The effect size was modest but consistent. The brain wasn't overloaded by the phone. It was distracted by the possibility of the phone. That's the dopamine loop. It doesn't need a reward. It needs the anticipation of a reward. That anticipation is the bait. If you recognize that hollow pull, the thumb moving without a reason, you're already seeing the circuit. Subscribe to keep uncovering the invisible systems that run your life while you think you're in control. Drop the word prediction error in the comments if you've ever felt that phantom buzz in your pocket with no notification waiting. Let me take you back to 1957. A Swedish pharmacologist named Arvid Carlsson was studying a molecule that most researchers dismissed as a mere precursor to adrenaline. He injected laboratory animals with a drug that depleted this molecule. And within hours, the animals lost the ability to move. They froze. They couldn't initiate action. Carlsson reversed the condition by injecting L-Dopa, the building block of that same forgotten molecule. The animals moved again. That molecule was dopamine. Carlsson won the Nobel Prize in 2000 for proving that dopamine is not a side player. It is the brain's gatekeeper of movement, motivation, and reward. Now fast forward to the 1970s. A neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz inserted microelectrodes into the brains of rhesus monkeys and recorded the firing rate of dopamine neurons. He found something strange. The neurons didn't fire when the monkey received juice. They fired when the monkey expected to receive juice. And if the juice didn't arrive, the firing rate dropped below baseline. This is the reward prediction error. The brain is not wired for pleasure. It is wired for anticipation. The dopamine system is a prediction machine. It calculates the gap between what you expect and what you get. And that gap, not the reward itself, drives your behavior. If you've ever lain awake at 2 a.m. unable to stop scrolling, you know that restless frustration. Your thumb is moving, but your brain is starving. Each swipe delivers a tiny spike of dopamine, followed immediately by a drop. The missing juice. The expectation that wasn't met. That gap is where your attention runs dry. Subscribe to keep following the thread back to your ancestors' wiring and see exactly how modern life hijacks it. Type missing juice in the comments if you felt that hollow frustration. The scroll with no arrival. Now consider this. Before 1994, there was no smartphone. Before 2007, the iPhone didn't exist. In 2005, the average American adult watched 4.2 hours of television per day. The screen was fixed. The content was linear. The dopamine system had a predictable rhythm. But in 2010, global mobile subscriptions passed 5 billion. The line between anticipation and reward collapsed into a single thumb movement. The dopamine system, which evolved over 200 million years in mammals to detect sparse, unpredictable rewards in a resource-scarce environment, was suddenly flooded with infinite, instant, zero-cost prediction errors. Your ancestors lived in a world where dopamine fired for the sound of a ripe fruit falling, the movement of prey in the bush, the warmth of a fire after dark. Each reward required effort. Each prediction error taught the brain to sharpen its foraging strategy. You live in a world where dopamine fires for a red notification dot, a reply that takes 3 seconds, a video that autoplays before you can decide whether you want to watch it. The system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it evolved to do. The environment changed faster than the wiring could adapt. Here's where it gets specific. A 2012 study from Pew Research found that the average US adult spent about 1 hour per day on mobile devices. By 2020, that number had tripled. The same continuous performance tests used by military psychologists in the 1950s to measure sustained attention now show an average 80% drop in hit rates when participants are exposed to notification streams for just 15 minutes. But those tests were designed for a pre-digital brain. They didn't account for the invisible cost. The hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory consolidation, shrinks when cortisol levels remain chronically elevated. Smartphone notifications, even when ignored, trigger a measurable cortisol spike. The hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex all engage in a micro-stress response that lasts 20 to 30 minutes after each ping. Researchers at the University of Texas found that a single notification can degrade task performance equivalent to losing 4 hours of sleep. Not because the notification is important, because the anticipation of not responding is more demanding than the response itself. Consider your own experience. How many times today did you pick up your phone and find nothing? How many times did you open an app, close it, and open it again within the same minute? That's the dopamine loop firing on empty. The prediction machine keeps predicting a reward that never arrives. The firing rate keeps rising and falling, like a starving predator patrolling a barren territory. Now, here's what researchers found instead. When they tracked dopamine release in a real-world foraging scenario, Kwang hunter-gatherers walking the Kalahari, the system fired only when the reward was unpredictable in time and effort. A steady stream of predictable small rewards, like the ones delivered by social media, does not sustain dopamine. It desensitizes the receptors. The same dose produces a smaller response over time. This is synaptic pruning. The strength of neural connections is use-dependent. Pathways that fire together wire together. Pathways that fire weakly are eliminated. Your brain is physically rewiring itself to expect constant, low-effort, high-variability rewards, and it is simultaneously pruning the pathways that sustain attention, planning, and delayed gratification. The ancestral brain didn't need willpower. It needed patience. The environment enforced it. You cannot scroll through the savanna. Now let me show you the scan. Functional MRI studies of participants in a resting state, lying still, doing nothing, show activity in the default mode network. This network is associated with self-reflection, memory consolidation, and creative insight. It activates when the brain is not engaged in a task. But when the same participants are exposed to a random notification schedule, the default mode network suppresses. The brain shifts into a hyper-vigilance state. It remains in that state for an average of 23 minutes after the last notification is removed. 23 minutes of lost default mode activity. That's the time your ancestors spent staring at the fire. The time when the brain processed the day's events, integrated memories, and generated new ideas. Before smartphones, boredom was a daily occurrence. The brain had to find internal stimulation. That internal search is what builds the neural pathways for sustained attention, planning, and metacognition. Without it, those pathways weaken. This is where the data gets uncomfortable. A longitudinal study tracking hippocampal volume over 30 years found that participants who reported higher daily screen time had significantly greater shrinkage in the hippocampal head, the region most critical for spatial memory and episodic recall, compared to those who reported lower screen time. The effect was independent of age, education, and baseline health. The brain is shrinking, not from disease, from disuse of its ancestral functions. But here's the part nobody talks about. The dopamine system can be reset. Neuroplasticity is bidirectional. The same pruning that degrades sustained attention can rebuild it if the environment changes. In the next segment, I'll show you the 3 specific mechanisms that degrade your dopamine baseline and the exact behavioral reset that reverses them in as little as 7 days. Most people never get past this point. They stay in the loop because they don't see the circuit. You're seeing it now. The loop isn't your fault. It's your grandfather's ghost in your hardware. But now that you see the circuit, you have the choice to rewire it. The first step is understanding what happens when you cut the feed. Your ancestors had no dopamine by design. They had dopamine by necessity. Their system fired for real rewards: water, food, shelter, connection. Yours fires for digital shadows of those rewards. The difference is not in the molecule. It's in the environment that shapes the circuit. And you can change the environment. To be continued. Let's look at one of those mechanisms right now, because it's the one that catches most people off guard. It's called the dopamine baseline reset. You've heard about digital detoxes, dopamine fasts, and weekend retreats. Most of them fail because they don't target the underlying prediction machine. They just remove the input for 48 hours, then dump you back into the same environment. The wiring hasn't changed. The expectation is still there. The real mechanism is simpler. It's about effort before reward. Your ancestors spent an average of 2 to 3 hours per day walking to find food. Every calorie they consumed required a measurable amount of energy to obtain. That effort created a dopamine calibration. The reward felt earned because the cost was real. You, on the other hand, can satisfy hunger with 3 taps on a screen. Thirst is solved by a single movement toward the refrigerator. Social connection arrives as a notification. Every reward is instant. Every cost is eliminated. The brain interprets this as a broken system. If no effort is required, the reward cannot be important. So the prediction machine raises the threshold. Next time, you need a bigger hit, a brighter color, a faster video, a louder notification. That's not addiction. That's adaptation to a zero-cost reward environment. Researchers at the National Institute on Drug Abuse found that when rats were given a lever that delivered a high-sugar reward with zero effort, their dopamine receptors down-regulated by 50% within 2 weeks. When the lever required 20 presses for the same reward, receptor density remained stable. The difference was not the reward, it was the effort. Now, apply that to your own life. Every time you postpone a task to scroll, you're training your brain that low-effort inputs are more valuable than high-effort outputs. The prefrontal cortex records that choice. It strengthens the neural pathway for distraction and weakens the pathway for sustained attention. This is what the data calls learned helplessness in the attention system. It's not that you can't focus. It's that your brain has learned that focusing requires more energy than scrolling, and it has no reason to conserve that energy because the scrolling reward is immediately available. But here's the part that shifts the frame. The brain is a prediction machine, yes, but it's also a cost-benefit calculator. If you change the ratio of effort to reward, the same system recalibrates. You don't need to eliminate screens. You need to insert a cost before the reward. One experiment from the University of California tracked 120 participants who agreed to a 5-minute delay before accessing social media. Just 5 minutes. The result after 1 week was a 40% reduction in daily time spent on the app. Participants reported feeling less anxious and more focused. The prediction machine had recalibrated to expect effort, and the reward felt real again. Your ancestors didn't have weak willpower. They had an environment that forced effort before reward. You have an environment that removes effort entirely. The difference is structural, not moral. That structural gap is your liver. Subscribe to learn exactly how to recalibrate your own prediction machine in the next breakdown. Type structural in the comments if you now see that your willpower was never the problem. The loop isn't your fault, but the choice to rewire it is yours, and you've already taken the first step. You've seen the circuit. Now cut the feed.